Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so before we get into this, I get a lot of questions from you guys, like recommended reading. People are like, I want to start with this character. Where do I begin? Like, one of the big questions is Spider-Man, right? People say, I want to get started into Spider-Man. How do I start? Honestly, that's just Dan Slott's Spider-Man big time. Just look that up, the beginning of Dan Slott's run. One of the best Spider-Man runs out there. But I get all kinds of other questions. Who's my favorite character? And different things like that. So for those of you guys who are interested in learning about like reading orders, like where to start with a character, different things along those lines, go check out the Discord. You'll find a link down in the description. My editor, Gordon, will create a permanent link and it actually should be in there already, but you'll have a permanent link there. Go check out the Discord. There's sections for like recommended reading, right? So like if you want to get into stuff, you can send me direct DMs on Discord. I do a weekly Q&A. I haven't done it for the last couple weeks because I've been moving, but I do like a weekly Q&A, different things along those lines where I answer your questions directly, so on and so forth. And I try my best to hang out with you guys. I'm super busy, but I do the best that I can to hang out and talk to you guys and so on. And the server is always being updated. If you guys ever want to talk to me directly, Discord's the best place to do that, or you can get a hold of me on Patreon. I send out like weekly emails, different things like that. But yeah, so getting into this is the Starbrand Reborn storyline from Jason Aaron's Avengers. And this is kind of funny. The reality is there's not a lot of meat and potatoes when it comes to the story, right? There isn't a whole lot that happens. And in fact, Jason Aaron actually skips around quite a bit in this story, but it does have the added benefit of allowing us to really kind of run over Starbrand, right? Now, for those of you guys who are really familiar with this, feel free to skip forward a couple minutes. This segment is really more for the people who are new, right? So Starbrand is really a byproduct of what's called a white event. And a white event really comes out of Warren Ellis's New Universal, right? Now, the white event did take place before that in the original iteration of really it was called New Universe, but the New Universe was really more of like the ultimate line of comics before the ultimate line of comics, right? So like, what would the world look like if people in the real world gained superpowers is really kind of how that worked. In terms of how it's being used in the modern day, that goes back to Warren Ellis, right? And the way this played out is that a white event was basically an event that took place whereby people would be granted powers. But the reason why the white event took place in New Universal under Warren Ellis is because you basically had what was called the Old Man. And this was a guy who had the mark of the Starbrand, the power of the Starbrand, and the result was that he put it in an asteroid. And when that happened, he was trying to get rid of this power. When it happened, basically it created this white event which gave us a new Starbrand. What you also get though, and this is kind of what Hickman did in his Avengers and New Avengers, kind of capitalizing on what Warren Ellis did, is that as it exists right now, combining both Warren Ellis's New Universal and Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, is the white event is essentially a kind of coming of age, so to speak, for any sort of race that exists out there on any particular planet. When a time comes where that race kind of reaches this sort of point by which they can start to evolve and essentially move out into like the universe more or less, or they have the potential to do so, a white event will be initiated. And what the white event does is it's supposed to create beings of different levels of power, right? So the Starbrand, for example, is a being that has enough power to protect the planet, and its power is limitless. And then you have a Night Mask who's designed to kind of help guide everybody through what the white event is supposed to be. Now, the last time we saw one was during Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, and it basically went awry, right? The white event didn't happen the way it was supposed to. But the result of that is a person who is a Starbrand essentially has unlimited power, right? But they're not like Franklin Richards. Franklin Richards' powers are limited only to his imagination. With a Starbrand, it doesn't work that way. The power they possess is relative to the threat they're facing, right? So if Starbrand was facing off against Galactus, he'd have enough power to basically protect the world from Galactus. If Starbrand is facing off against like the Incredible Hulk, then he would have enough power to basically face off against the Incredible Hulk, and that's it. And the other part of this is that when a person becomes a Starbrand, they're basically met with more power than they can usually handle right off the bat, right? They're just suddenly imbued with abilities, right? So imagine tomorrow you wake up and then you've got all this insane amount of power and you can't really control it, right? That's really what you end up running into. And that's really where this kind of picks up, right? This initially picks up with Gladiator, who's still Magister of the Shi'ar Empire. And again, this is something that's really been around since after the event of War of Kings, right? Gladiator basically becoming the ruler of the Shi'ar race. And ultimately what's happened here is one of their vessels, really like one of their prison ships, has essentially exploded out there somewhere and multiple people were killed. The other part of this is that those individuals who were killed, or at least those individuals whose bodies were left intact, essentially received the mark of the Starbrand. Now, this is kind of a funny thing because Jason Aaron kind of seems to play it fast and loose insofar as Gladiator more or less knows what's going on, but nobody else really seems to know, right? Nobody else really seems to be aware of exactly what's happening. And a lot of that's because of the fact that even within the confines of Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, Gladiator didn't really have that much interaction with the Starbrand Kevin Connell, right? He didn't really have a whole lot of interaction with him. Instead, he was an Avengers character, right? Now, as you got further and further into Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers, and as you got further and further into the multiversal collapse, then Gladiator played more of a role. But his role was really confined to the Earth is the focal point of these incursions. If we want to save our universe, we have to destroy the Earth. Let's go blow it up. And that's where, you know, the Avengers and the Shi'ar sort of came to blows with one another. But Gladiator kind of taking off and saying, okay, like, we're not going to send any more ships into the path of this Starbrand because it has more than enough power to destroy it. I'm going to go check it out myself. If I don't return in some measure of time, contact the Avengers, right? And that's basically what ends up happening. That basically you end up having Robbie Reyes and you end up having Captain America and Black Widow. Kind of a funny thing here. Captain America's talking to Black Widow, right? You know, and he's kind of like, well, you know, we're going into space and I needed to have, you know, I need to take people who are on my list of individuals who can be trusted for this, and you're on my list. That's not true. Black Widow's not on any major heavy hitters list because sure, she's got like super, you know, she's got a super soldier serum of sorts, but like she's no spacefaring character. In reality, Captain America's not on anybody's list, or at least he shouldn't be, but he's really good at rallying troops, right? Like if you guys ever read Jonathan Hickman's Infinity, that was like the total redemption of Captain America in terms of why he's ever involved in any spacefaring escapade whatsoever. Dude, that amazing line when Thor kills the builder and they're like, well, what do we do now? And Captain America's like, we win. I was like, okay, Cap. I see you, home slice. But nonetheless, there's a couple things that are going on here, right? The technology of Black Panther, really him as a whole, the reason why you don't really see him here is he's kind of following up with the disappearance of Tony Stark. All we really know that's going on with Tony, at least at the time this story is being done, which really kind of seems to fly in the face of what's going on with a lot of like the Iron Man story itself, as well as this particular story, right? Because in the Iron Man comics, he's leading an artificial intelligence revolt against humanity, basically. In this story, he was time displaced, right? He ended up coming across what looked like a calcified prehistoric version of his helmet, and then when he touched it, he was suddenly yanked back to 1 million years ago. So it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. But things like Black Panther's technology has been used by She-Hulk, for example, to basically harness gamma rays, right? So instead of just sort of being out there and being surrounded by gamma rays, but not really being able to use them, what it does is it basically takes those gamma rays and absorbs them into her body, which in turn enhances her strength, speed, durability, different things like that. It's really kind of a power upgrade for She-Hulk more so than anything else. The issue with this is that once they take off into space, about 5 days later, they get caught up in these kind of magnetic webs that have been laid by these various scavengers that are out there. And it's actually cool to see Jason Aaron do this, to have him show us this, because whenever you think about the spacefaring escapades in Marvel, it's very easy to get caught up in like the Nova Corps and like Quasar and like this event and that event, different things like that. But it's the small nuances in between, right? The fact that there are just roaming bands of pirates out there who set up traps for people, and then when they catch them, they basically try to overtake their ship and then kill everybody on board or sell them, you know, they'll sell them in slavery and then scrap the ship, take whatever they can, and then leave. Release the ship into whatever oblivion happens to be waiting out there, and then basically reset the trap and wait for somebody else to come along. It's kind of cool to see that sort of setup. The issue with this is that during this process, and we're not really told how, but we can largely kind of assume, you know, that it makes sense, but basically Thor's been infected by the Brood. Now, the Brood is a group that we haven't really talked about, and they've been around for a very, very, very long time. And the reality is that the Brood, at least according to A History of the Marvel Universe by Mark Waid, is the universe's first predator. But the Brood is one of these races where basically it plants a kind of embryo inside of a being, but instead of it being like the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, right, where like it bursts out from your insides, what it does is it basically rematerializes you and it turns you into a Brood, right? So that's kind of how they propagate their race, is by infecting others, turning them into Broods, and then sending them forward. That's the whole idea behind the Brood saga when it came to the X-Men, Storm being turned into a Brood, that kind of a thing. And so as a result of this, what's been going on is for the last 5 days, Thor has literally just been holding his hammer. And so long as he can hold his hammer, he maintains his identity. I'm Thor, I'm still worthy, that kind of a thing. So it's kind of cool. Now, of course, this takes place before the events of Thor by Donny Cates. You know, they don't really take place at the same time. Marvel's direction in terms of continuity is kind of all over the place. But what you also have is She-Hulk basically just fighting off all these different Brood and all these different, you know, invaders that are out there. Carol Danvers was sent out into space to essentially find some means of escape, and then ultimately she does. Now, of course, in the middle of all this, Thor loses his identity, right? He basically ends up turning to the Brood and sort of doing what all the Brood do, which is either try to implant their embryos in somebody else or kill everything they find. And that's exactly what goes on here, right? Like literally Thor just starts attacking Captain America. Now, at the same time that's going on, what you've also got is you've got Robbie Reyes and you've got Black Widow trying to outrun Silver Surfer. And the reason why is because what Silver Surfer had done here is in response to the power of the Starbrand and recognizing the threat it represents, insofar that if the Starbrand chose to and was somehow able to access the full totality of the Starbrand's power, it would become a universal threat. Basically bringing together these various heralds, all for the purpose of tracking down the Starbrand and then trying to eliminate it. They've come across the path of Robbie Reyes and Black Widow and basically come to the realization the Avengers are trying to intercept the Starbrand as well. But given the history of the Starbrand and the Avengers, the heralds basically come to the realization the Avengers will do this time what they've done before. When you basically got the Starbrand that manifested on Earth, the Avengers initially tried to contain him, and then once they realized what was going on, inducted him into their ranks. But because of the fact that the Starbrand as it exists right now is literally jumping from one world to the next, just incinerating it and then leaving, well, it is very reminiscent of the Dark Phoenix saga, kind of like this Starbrand gone insane. It's smarter and it's more reasonable to contain and destroy the Starbrand than it is to try to find a way to ally with them or anything along those lines. So you do get some cool moments here and there. If it hadn't been done so many times before, I would say it's cool to see Captain America lift the hammer of Thor, but we've seen that happen a zillion times, right? So like the impact is kind of gone. It's kind of disappointing. And honestly, and I'll be honest with you guys, after what happened in Avengers Endgame, I cannot really think of a circumstance where anybody lifting Thor's hammer is going to be as awesome as when Captain America did it in that movie. I mean, I know you guys reacted the same way I did, right? Like, I know you guys watch the videos on YouTube where like you see like the crowd reactions to like him lifting the hammer of Thor. Dude, the watching the crowd reactions in the theaters is like amazing. It gets me so amped. But no, nothing's ever going to be that cool. It's interesting, and that's basically it. But none of it's that significant. Now, one of the other cool things that we get here is we get the Silver Surfer facing off against Robbie Reyes. Now, if this was like Johnny Blaze, or if it was Danny Ketch, I would say, okay, this is a pretty predictable fight. But remember, Robbie Reyes is in a lot of ways the new Ghost Rider on the block, right? He's the new kid. He's the new guy. He's been around for a little while, but he was not around anywhere near as long as Danny Ketch or Johnny Blaze. And so in a lot of ways, he's still basically learning how to use his abilities. Now, as time has passed, Marvel has expanded the role of Robbie Reyes, so his powers are more closer in line with the traditional Ghost Rider powers, right? So for a long time, he was not able to use the penance stare, which is one of the powers of the Ghost Rider to force a being to basically feel every ounce of pain they've ever caused anyone they've ever encountered over the course of their lives, right? So like if Galactus was made to feel the penance stare, then Galactus would basically experience every ounce of pain he's caused all the trillions of beings that have been snuffed out by his existence as the devourer of worlds, right? It would probably render Galactus insane. But one of the cool things to come out of this is because Ghost Rider is so powerful, right? Because he's powered by the cosmic demon Mephisto, because he's so powerful, basically Black Widow ends up taking off with the Ghost Rider car, and then in turn, Robbie Reyes knocks the Silver Surfer off his surfboard and then takes it, right? So basically, Robbie Reyes steals the Silver Surfer surfboard, which is awesome, but it lasts like that. It lasts for like a split second. Because remember, the surfboard of the Silver Surfer is part and parcel to himself, right? And so basically he just recalls it, right? It's like Thor's hammer. You never really see an instance where somebody takes Thor's hammer and then keeps Thor from using it, right? I mean, it's like, this is my hammer now, and they just take it forever and Thor never gets it back, right? I mean, Thor can just summon his hammer to himself, and so long as Thor remains worthy and the person who's currently holding the hammer isn't so strong that the hammer cannot leave their grasp, Thor will always get it back, right? And so it's the same thing with Silver Surfer's board, right? He's just like, to me, my board, and then just leaves Robbie Reyes. It basically just leaves him, and that's it. He ends up in the car with Black Widow, and that's the end of that, right? And so the result of this is that we basically end up kind of, picking up with them once they're sort of on this location, in this particular area. You do have Black Widow who kind of dons a Iron Man suit, which is actually kind of cool. But again, a lot of what we're seeing here, and this may very well be Jason Aaron just trying to kind of do a tour de France of the kind of various aspects of what the Avengers have done in the past, but we're not really seeing anything new here, right? Like Iron Man using his technology to create suits for other people, that's been done before. Now, it is cool to see Black Widow, right? Black Widow having an Iron Man suit in and of herself, because what this does is it enhances what's already there, right? Black Widow is exceedingly capable when it comes to like hand-to-hand combat and strategy. If I'm Captain America and I'm sitting around making a list of people, I'm like, all right, guys, we're gonna go into space and fight Galactus. Who are we gonna take? Black Widow's name is not gonna be on that list. But with regards to like this kind of a scenario, I guess it does sort of make sense, right? Her fighting against, some forces that are out there, using her strength, throwing boulders at them, different things along those lines. It's a cool little thing, but it's by no means a huge moment, right? It's not a big significant moment. It's just kind of a thing that happens, that features her character. Really, one of the big things that come out of this is Blade essentially bonding itself to Boy Thing. Right now, Boy Thing is really kind of like this sort of leftover, this kind of remnant of Man Thing. Man Thing, and I don't know how many of you guys know about him, but he's actually one of the more intriguing characters in comics. Man Thing is basically a guardian of the Florida Everglades, right? And the reason why is because inside the Florida Everglades is a portal to what's basically the nexus of all realities, right? So you could somehow pass the Man Thing, and we'll talk about how that's very difficult to do here in a second, second, but you could somehow pass the Man-Thing. You could enter into the nexus of realities, and what you would see are like just these twisting bridges and all these different paths that lead into like these different portals and barriers and things like that. And essentially, you could just travel from one universe to the next by using this sort of dimensional gateway, more or less, or this dimensional kind of nexus. Now, it is kind of cool because it's one of many instances, many variations of ways to access different universes. But the fact remains that the reason why this is kind of cool is because in response to what's happening and the various heralds that are coming down on everybody, Boy Thing basically bonds itself to Blade. And this is an excruciating concept, and it goes into our discussion about how it can be difficult to pass the Man-Thing in the Florida Everglades, because for those individuals who encounter Man-Thing and they feel fear, they'll burn at his touch. And it's usually enough to incinerate a person, right? It's usually enough to destroy a person. For Blade, he's kind of a necessity here, right? So he's able to kind of keep himself going, but Boy Thing, it basically attached itself to him. Now, if this was Man-Thing, right, like the full-on Man-Thing, it probably would have killed Blade. But what it does is it allows him to basically adapt this blade that he has and then pierce the body of the Silver Surfer. And that's why the Silver Surfer doesn't really seem to get into a straight-up skirmish with Blade. And the reason why is because given the power of Man-Thing, right, given the power of what Blade has right now, he could feasibly burn the Silver Surfer. Now, we've never really seen an instance where that's happened, so at that point, we're just kind of guessing, right? We've never seen somebody like the Silver Surfer show up on Earth, try to enter the nexus of all realities, encounter the Man-Thing, and the Man-Thing says, you feel fear, and then burn the Silver Surfer alive. We've never really seen that happen before. But it's also one of these things where Jason Aaron kind of avoids it intermittently. And the reason why is because relatively close to them, there's this massive explosion where the Starbrand has basically gone off again and destroyed another world. And so when this happens, suddenly you have the arrival of Gladiator. And Gladiator showing up here, he's tracked the Starbrand down before anybody else did. And basically what we end up finding out is this Starbrand is a pregnant woman, right? So here's a question you have to ask. Who actually has the mark of the Starbrand? Is it the woman or her child? I would surmise it's her child that has the power of the Starbrand and is kind of exiting out through the woman herself. But regardless of the situation, Gladiator immediately goes to take her out. Now, when it comes to Gladiator, his loyalty is to the Shi'ar Empire. When he was leader of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, which is pretty much all forms, all standards of measurement, the most elite fighting force in all of the universe, right? Like there are very, very few teams that come close to the power of the Imperial Guard. But when it comes to Gladiator, his role is to protect the Shi'ar Empire, right? So during his time as leader of the Imperial Guard, you eventually saw the ousting of Lilandra, who was the Empress after her brother Daken was defeated during the original Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas. And so when you ended up seeing Gabriel Summers, the third Summers brother, the Omega level mutant who basically left Earth and then conquered the Shi'ar Empire, Gladiator's role was to serve Gabriel Summers, right? He serves the throne. It doesn't matter who it is that's on that throne. Now, at this point in time, when he's leader of the Shi'ar, his role is to safeguard the Shi'ar Empire, and he'll do whatever he needs to do in order to ensure that happens, even if it means taking out a pregnant woman. It's hardcore and it's extreme, but so is Gladiator, right? That's one of the reasons why I say if Gladiator ended up in the MCU and it was one of these things, because he wouldn't really openly provoke a fight like Thanos would, but if it was one of those things where, like, for whatever reason, the various forces of Earth ended up facing off against the Shi'ar, the Earth superheroes would get obliterated by Gladiator, probably a Gladiator by himself, but also with the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. Like, he'd be more than enough. But then you have the other Avengers that basically jump in and say, we're not about this kind of business, right? Like, we're not going to take out a pregnant chick. So they really kind of offer a helping hand. And then the Heralds sort of watch it go down, right? And so the way this plays out is at one point in time, this woman basically worked at a Roxxon plant in Kansas, right? And Roxxon basically shut down the plant and moved it out to Madripoor, which really falls directly in line with Roxxon as one of the most corrupt organizations out there, which is involved in everything, right? Like human trading, drug trafficking, buying politicians and things like that, renting politicians from time to time. Like it's one of these things where like they're a super corrupt organization. But what ended up happening here is she had basically been brought by space coyotes, right? These essentially ex-SHIELD agents who were flying around and basically smuggling people out of Earth. Now, we're not explicitly given a whole lot of exposition here, right? So we don't really know if this was done because there's just greener pastures out there in space. Kind of makes sense because when you look at Earth in Marvel Comics, it basically sucks in comparison to like pretty much all the other worlds out there that are far more advanced technologically. But regardless of the circumstance, she ended up being transported into Shi'ar space. And when she was there, she essentially worked on these various plants, picking berries and so on. It really seems to kind of be an allegory of like Hispanics smuggled into the US, more or less. But the result of this is that ultimately she's busted by the Shi'ar and then ultimately put aboard a prison ship where she's supposed to serve 3 years in a Shi'ar prison. During this time, and there's no real indication as to why, she was chosen as the Starbrand. Now, when it comes to a person being chosen as a Starbrand, the rhyme or reason behind that is never explored, right? It's never really explained. We literally went from New Universal with Warren Ellis to where it was a result of the Starbrand basically being put onto an asteroid and then ultimately coming back to Earth and bonding itself to a person, to Jonathan Hickman, where like Kevin Connell was chosen, but only because the various space stations that initiate these wide events hit the panic button and it was just a random person was chosen. The normal indication is that the type of person that's chosen is a person that can do good, right? They can actually serve the role of protecting the world, right? They have the courage, the fortitude, the willpower to be able to pull that off. In this instance, somebody was just arbitrarily selected to become the Starbrand. And when that happened, the massive release of power ended up destroying the ship. And then she doesn't really have the ability to control any of the power of the Starbrand. And so literally she's just been jumping from world to world, trying to figure out how these powers work, trying to understand what's been going on. And in these moments of pain where she's essentially getting ready to give birth to a child, the power just manifests with explosive results and destroys worlds, different things like that. So it's not as though she was marked with the power of the Starbrand, gained these abilities, and then just went on a crusade to make the world, make the universe pay for her suffering or anything like that. She's basically in a situation she doesn't fully understand and doesn't know how to control its power. The other part of this is that where she does give birth to the baby, she ends up dying in the process. And this is when we end up finding out that it is actually the baby who received the mark of the Starbrand, not the woman herself. And so as a result of that, of course, the Avengers end up taking the baby and basically saying, we're going to raise this child, right? We're going to bring this child in and it's going to become a full-fledged member of the Avengers. We will take care of it. In which case Gladiator basically says, okay, if you do this, then it's on you, right? If something happens and this baby becomes a threat to the universe and my empire, I will come back and I'll do whatever I have to do, even if it means killing all of you. The Heralds say the exact same thing. We'll keep an eye on what's going on, but understand if that baby becomes a threat to the universe, we'll destroy everybody on Earth. And so what you end up having is the Avengers coming back to their base of operations, and they ask what's probably the most important question. If this baby has the mark of the Starbrand, and if the mark of the Starbrand manifests in whatever form of power this child needs, or this child feels like it needs, and it doesn't fully understand itself or the world around it, and something scares it or starts crying, what's going to happen? This is a very real and dangerous situation, right? Because you're talking about a being that could at any point in time have the power to destroy anything up to and including the universe. And if that's the case, this baby could wipe out all of existence like that, not even really intending to, just in the blink of an eye, just like it would just destroy everything. And so it's just like, okay, so like this baby is probably the most powerful, but the most dangerous being in all of reality in Marvel Comics right now. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Okay, I want to give a shout out to Kyle B, David Joseph, Ben, John H, AJ, Matt N, Jeff R, John H, Lean and Mean, which is an awesome name, Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, Joey M, Steven Z, Austin B, Adam K, and Genosis 916. Remember, guys, you can send me messages and I'll run off whatever your message is at the end of the video, so long as there's nothing crazy. But if you want to put a message in there, send me an email, rob@robertjefferson.com, and if you are one of these people who gets shout outs, then I will tack it in there. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys.